question.
Welcome to Kerio's 5 in 15-minute session on SQL Server migration projects. I'm joined here this afternoon by Matthew Robertshaw, who's our Principal Data Platform Consultant here at Kerio, and we're going to go into a little bit of detail as to everything that's involved with the SQL Server migration project. Hi, Matt.
Hi, Fiona. Yeah, thanks very much. So, as Fiona mentioned, I'm a principal consultant here at Kerio. So for the most part, that means I'm working with clients and organizations migrating and modernizing their data platform workloads in Azure.
That's fab. Thanks, Matt. So we've just got a couple of questions to start with. And I think one thing that our customers always ask us is how and when is it best to know when to use SQL VMs, SQL Managed Instance, Azure SQL DB? Like, what does the landscape look like in terms of making some of these decisions?
Yeah, I know that's a really good question. SQL Server on VMs and Azure SQL Managed Instance provide two alternative paths to Azure. Okay, so depending on whether you're looking to migrate or modernize your database workloads. So SQL Server on VMs is ideal for those lift and shift scenarios where you might be constrained by time, such as data center hosting contracts. Expires in 6 months and you've got maybe 300 servers to migrate. You also might need extended security updates because you're running SQL Server 2012, or you might have really urgent capacity needs. But there are also some functional considerations to consider. So are you using features such as Polybase or file stream? Are you dependent on operating system level components or your tools and utilities? If the answer to these is yes, then deploying SQL Server on a VM is probably best for you. Overall, I'd say that lift and shift migrations can be used to accelerate your cloud migration journey whilst mitigating the risks associated with those more lengthy modernization programs. But, let's face it, clients don't move to Azure just to rehost their virtual machines. Clients move to Azure so they sit closer to and alongside the modern platform services that Microsoft provide. Azure SQL Managed Instance is a great example of a modern service that sits in Azure. High availability is built in, disaster recovery is optional. You have access to many of the box product features, although there are some exceptions, but you don't have to worry about database backups, SQL and OS upgrades, patching. All of this frees up your time to work on more impactful business initiatives.
Amazing. So in that instance then, if say for example there's different scenarios, ultimately what are the benefits of moving to SQL on-prem to Azure?
Yeah, there's so many benefits, and obviously we've only got 15 minutes here, but ultimately Azure offers a really comprehensive mix of different technologies, guidance, programs, tools to help migrate your data center to the cloud. You can migrate with confidence and optimize costs with on-demand turnkey configurations that allow you to scale your workloads up and down as needed. So services like Azure SQL Database and Managed Instance, as I've already mentioned, provide high availability with that optional disaster recovery, which ultimately gives businesses the confidence that they need to be able to migrate those mission critical workloads to Azure. Because it's still the same database engine we've grown to love over the many years, much of our knowledge and understanding of the box product is still relevant and transferable to Azure today. And when it comes to licensing, there are cost-saving offers and capabilities which are actually hybrid by design. So Microsoft know that you'll be working in that or operating in that way for the foreseeable future. So with Azure, you can be confident that you are running Windows and SQL Server workloads at the lowest total cost of ownership versus competitors, thanks to exclusive programs like the Azure Hybrid Benefit. And in addition to that competitive TCO, clients can secure their workloads with industry-leading intelligence and built-in security controls. And also the business itself is no longer bound by those capacity constraints of the data center. You can scale on demand and meet the business needs of tomorrow without having to worry about any of that infrastructure management stuff that comes along with on-premises deployments. So those are just some of the benefits of moving SQL on-prem to Azure.
Amazing. Thanks, Matt. I mean, even with all of those benefits in consideration, there's a lot of customers that do put off migrating SQL, whether or not it's based on complex workloads or there's legacy applications. So what are some of the risks associated with moving SQL to the cloud?
Yeah, it's fair to say, clients have lots of concerns, and I think in my experience, the top concern that many clients have when migrating to Azure is performance related. So, they're asking questions. Will my workload perform in the cloud? How do we continue to ensure it performs as well or even better in the cloud? What do we do about testing? And these are all really valid concerns that we can mitigate with some careful planning and testing. So at Coeo, we follow the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework, which is a proven methodology for migrating workloads to Azure. As part of this framework, there's a plan phase which focuses on using tools like Azure Migrate to discover and assess the environment with a view to trying to understand the size and scale of the workloads. So ultimately, this allows us to make some upfront decisions about the compute requirements and consequently the running costs associated with running those workloads in Azure. And finally, the framework also has an adopt phase, which is essentially where we start moving batches of workloads and migration waves to Azure. So here we can test in isolation with the business and validate our early sizing decisions and assumptions ahead of the final cutover. So those are just some of the ways that we can mitigate risk using established frameworks and tooling that are available today from Microsoft.
That's perfect. I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's just giving customers and some organisations comfort over the project overall, and that
Absolutely.
Almost is not going to be, with business critical systems, there's not going to be a high degree of failure associated. So that's really important. The conversation of upgrading SQL or migrating SQL has been around for quite a long time, but why is this shift happening with the industry now to really look at bringing SQL into PaaS services or actually adopting cloud for SQL?
Yeah, I think ultimately businesses want to be, competitive, agile and secure, and they want to offer new and innovative products and services to their customers, whichever sector they operate in. They want to be able to shift and react to changing market conditions, enabling them to grab the early initiative, and they want to be able to make better decisions with the data they already have and turn that into a commodity from which they can derive real business value. And I think Microsoft Azure provides businesses with a really good foundation to build those innovative solutions and secure solutions that enable all of these things. So migrating on-premises workloads to Azure, as I've mentioned, is just the start. Businesses really move to the cloud, not just to rehost their virtual machine infrastructure, but to sit closer to that platform, which they can often get better scalability, cost points, and manageability. And I think ultimately businesses are also starting to think about what advanced analytics means to them and what opportunities, use cases, and processes exist within that business that could benefit from the application of machine learning and artificial intelligence. So overall, I feel Microsoft has done a really good job in building the capabilities into its products, democratizing things like machine learning, artificial intelligence, and making them accessible to businesses and its users, which I feel all contribute to that shift that we're seeing right now.
With you. So really the opportunity here is to, rather than leaving SQL Server on-prem and it becoming a legacy system, that actually it's becoming part of the digital transformation strategies. We're really bringing it in line with maybe some of the other services that customers are offering as part of their cloud strategy.
Absolutely. It's all about, trying to align the reasons and rationale for migrating your SQL Server workloads to the overall, strategy around analytics and data, because obviously the two come hand in hand.
With you. So from a customer perspective, have you worked with a client recently where, they were looking at this exact project? They may have been hesitant to migrate SQL, but they actually went through migration and realised some of the benefits.
Yeah, and I can think of a real scenario that we had last year, actually. So we worked with a client through Microsoft at a very specific business problem. So the client had to maintain a legacy on-premises application that was using SQL Server 2008 R2, which was already out of support by that point. So whilst the majority of its workforce had transitioned to a new SaaS solution, this legacy application still had a very small number of users. And since the business worked within the financial services sector, they were required, mandated to maintain and support that legacy application for a fixed period of time. But obviously, crucially, that period of time went beyond obviously the support date for SQL 2008 R2. So since the majority of the business users had already transitioned to using that new SaaS solution, the client was faced with needing to maintain a legacy application which only had a handful of users just so that it could meet its regulatory obligations. So that's where we spoke to the client and we looked at using Microsoft's extended security update offer in Azure. And we helped them, migrate their application servers that were using Windows Server 2008 R2 and database servers that were, as I mentioned, using SQL Server 2008 R2 to Azure so that we could they could continue to receive security updates before or beyond the end of support date, allowing them to meet obviously their obligations around regulatory bodies and support and whatnot. So I feel that, that's a good example of where I think a lift and shift exercise that needed completing within 6 months because we were time bound by the project ensured that the client could evidence that their solution was still fully supported to the bodies that needed to know, basically.
That's great. Thanks, Matt. So that's kind of the end of our 5 in 15, our 5 questions. But Matt, is there anything that you think customers should really be thinking about when they're looking at a migration project potentially in the next 12 months that you think it would be important for them to know?
Yeah, no, I think as part of the whole planning around the migration, I think we've already spoken about the fact that, we at Cowie use the cloud adoption framework as a basis for, setting out a methodology for the migration itself. As part of that, it's always important to understand, what the scope of the workload is and try to establish some early sight of what those costs are going to be, because obviously that's a really important factor when building in the plan into the business case, and also do a lot of research around how you're licensing SQL Server today. Do you have enterprise core licensing? Do you have server CALs? Though there are products and features available within Microsoft, such as the Azure Hybrid Benefit that businesses can utilize to realize significant cost savings on licensing SQL Server and Azure. In addition to that, there are also other benefits like reserve capacity, for example, where you can or customers can pay for a 1 or 3 year commitment, or pay up front or pay monthly, and get significant savings on the compute. So by combining the Azure Hybrid Benefit and reserve capacity, you can realize some really significant cost savings, and doing all of that planning ahead of time will put you in a much better position when it comes to the migration, because you'll obviously have a better understanding of what you're going to deploy, how much it's going to cost, and what that run rate is going to be ultimately.
Amazing. Thanks, Matt. That's a great level of detail. I think we'll most probably close the session there. Obviously, for anyone listening and watching this session, if they do want more information or would like to speak to Matt in more detail, please do reach out to Cowie. Thanks very much.